Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Owen. When my fiancé's brother texted me the night before the wedding, telling me to ask his sister a question that seemed harmless on the surface, I had no idea how bad things would get from there. A simple question opened the can of worms and changed the direction of my life forever. I'd been with Gabrielle for 4 years when her brother texted me the night before our wedding to tell me she'd cheated in Vegas. In the span of an hour, I went from an excited groom rehearsing his vows to a devastated man calling off a wedding that hundreds of people had traveled to attend. For years that I'd thought were building toward marriage and partnership, but that contained a betrayal so recent and so calculated that she'd planned to marry me without ever telling me the truth. If you enjoy stories like this, take a moment to tap the like button and leave a comment on where you're watching from. Let's know ourselves. Now back to the story. I've known Gabrielle since university. We'd been in the same business program at Arizona State, had overlapping friend groups, and had been casually acquainted for years. But we hadn't dated during college. We were just friendly classmates who'd occasionally study together or end up at the same parties. After graduation, we'd gone our separate ways. I'd moved back to Scottsdale to work for my family's restaurant business. My parents owned a small chain of upscale Italian restaurants across the Phoenix metro area, for locations built over 20 years of hard work. I was their only child. The restaurants would eventually be mine. So after getting my business degree, I'd come home to learn the operations from the ground up. I started as a manager at one of the busiest locations, working long hours and learning every aspect of running a successful restaurant. The work was demanding, 60 to 70-hour weeks, early mornings receiving deliveries and late nights closing up. It was a constant problem-solving, staff management, difficult customer handling, and quality and consistency. Very little personal time or energy left over. About 2 years after graduation, I attended a university reunion event, one of those alumni gatherings where everyone shows up to network and reminisce about college days. Gabrielle had been there. We'd reconnected over drinks, talked for hours, catching up on what we'd each been doing since graduation. She was working in marketing for a tech company, seemed to be doing well professionally and personally. We'd exchanged numbers, started texting regularly, and had coffee a few times. Eventually, we started dating seriously. Gabrielle became my emotional anchor quickly. She understood my demanding work schedule in ways previous girlfriends hadn't. She didn't complain when I had to cancel plans because of restaurant emergencies. She would even visit me at work during slow periods. She seemed genuinely supportive of my career and family obligations. I believed she understood my lifestyle completely and had chosen to be with me, knowing what my work required. She was loyal and committed despite the challenges of dating someone with my schedule. We dated for 4 years before I proposed. I took time to be certain because marriage felt like a massive commitment. But by year 4, I was sure Gabrielle was who I wanted to build a future with, who I wanted as my partner in eventually taking over the family business, and who I wanted as the mother of my future children. I proposed during a weekend trip. I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. She said yes enthusiastically. We celebrated and started planning our future together. For months into the engagement, we moved in together and started cohabiting while figuring out how to share space and build a household. The wedding planning began in earnest. We set a date about 8 months from the engagement, started booking venues, hiring vendors, and sending save the dates to family and friends. I saw the wedding as the beginning of a new chapter, proof that despite my busy, demanding life, I'd chosen love and partnership. I trusted Gabrielle completely. I never questioned her faithfulness or her commitment. Although her friend group was chaotic in ways mine wasn't. They seemed wild when they got together, but I'd assumed they were harmless. I assumed that even if they partied and got loud, Gabrielle wouldn't let them influence her into anything genuinely problematic. About 3 weeks before the wedding, everything was finalized, guests were making travel arrangements, and we were in the final countdown. Gabrielle announced she was having her bachelorette party in Las Vegas. She said it would be a girls' weekend, just her bridesmaids and a few other close friends. A fun getaway before the wedding. The classic Vegas bachelorette experience. I didn't object because I didn't see any reason to. Bachelor and bachelorette parties were normal. People went to Vegas all the time for these events. I trusted Gabrielle to celebrate appropriately without doing anything that would damage our relationship. I had my own bachelor party plan for the following weekend, much more subdued, just close friends going to a Diamondbacks game and having dinner and drinks after. Gabrielle left for Vegas on a Thursday. She would be gone by Sunday. I worked long shifts at the restaurant during those days, grateful for the distraction and not thinking much about what she was doing. She returned Sunday evening. Seemed tired but cheerful, usual post-vacation exhaustion. I asked casual questions about the trip. How was Vegas? What did they do? Did she have fun? Standard questions you ask someone returning from a trip. Gabrielle's answers were normal. Said they'd gone to shows and clubs. It had been fun but exhausting. That she was glad to be home. But I noticed she avoided eye contact when answering and quickly changed the subject. She seemed uncomfortable discussing more details about the weekend. I dismissed my unease as her just being tired. Figured she was probably hungover and embarrassed about how much they'd partied. It didn't indicate anything more serious. Over the following weeks leading up to the wedding, final preparations consumed all our time and energy. Last-minute vendor confirmations. Seating shots. Finalizing the timeline for the wedding day. All the million small details that go into a big event. Guests started arriving about a week before the wedding. Out-of-town family and friends are checking into hotels. The rehearsal dinner happened 2 nights before the wedding. Everything felt celebratory and exciting. I did notice that Gabrielle's brother seemed distant during the rehearsal dinner. He'd always been friendly with me before. We'd bonded over sports and had developed a genuine friendship over the 4 years Gabrielle and I had dated. But during the rehearsal, he barely spoke to me. I'd assumed it was stress from dealing with something personal. It wasn't worth addressing when there were so many other things to focus on. I also noticed that Gabrielle's maid of honor kept watching me during the rehearsal dinner. It was like she was studying me or assessing something. But whenever I'd catch her looking, she'd look away quickly. Again, I didn't think much of it. The night before the wedding, I was in the hotel room I'd reserved for myself. Tradition dictated that Gabrielle and I shouldn't see each other the night before, so she was staying in a different room with her maid of honor. I was doing final preparations. My suit was hanging ready. I'd reviewed my vows probably 50 times and was practicing my speech for the reception, feeling this mixture of excitement and nervousness and overwhelming emotion about the next day. Around 9:30 that evening, my phone lit up with a text message from Gabrielle's brother. The message was short and devastating. You deserve better. Ask her about Vegas. I stared at my phone, feeling confusion wash over me. I read the message multiple times, trying to understand what it meant. My first thought was that this was a prank, that someone had hacked Gabrielle's brother's phone, that this was some weird joke I didn't understand. But something about the phrasing felt serious. It felt urgent and intentional rather than playful. I considered calling Gabrielle's brother immediately, but hesitated. If this was serious, if there was actually something about Vegas I needed to know, a text conversation wouldn't be sufficient. This required a face-to-face discussion. Anxiety built in my chest because Gabrielle's brother wasn't a prankster. He was straightforward and honest. We'd become genuinely close over the years. If he was reaching out like this the night before my wedding, it was because something was very wrong. I looked at the time. 9:45. Still relatively early. Gabrielle was in her room with her maid of honor, probably doing final preparations or just relaxing before the big day. I decided I needed to see her immediately. I needed to ask directly what had happened in Vegas that the brother is talking about. I started rehearsing how to approach the conversation as I walked through the hotel toward Gabrielle's room. How do you ask your fiancée the night before your wedding if she did something wrong during her bachelorette party? What tone do you use? How direct should you be? I couldn't settle on the right approach, but I just knew I needed answers immediately. I reached Gabrielle's room and knocked. My fiancé's maid of honor opened the door, looking surprised to see me. I walked in without waiting for an invitation. Gabrielle was sitting on the bed in pajamas, looking relaxed until she saw the expression on my face. I asked directly without preamble, "Your brother just texted me. What happened in Vegas?" The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Gabrielle went pale. Color literally drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stared at me like a trapped animal who just realized the trap had closed. In that moment, before she said anything, before any explanation or confession, I knew something had happened. Her reaction told me everything. Her maid of honor, who'd been standing near the door, spoke up. Her voice had a tone of frustrated resignation. "You didn't tell him?" The question hung in the air. Gabrielle's eyes filled with tears, but she still wasn't speaking, just looking between me and the maid of honor with panic written across her face. I was shocked by her maid of honor's question. It confirmed that there was something to tell. That both of them knew about whatever had happened in Vegas. That Gabrielle had kept something from me while she had been aware of it. I looked at her maid of honor, then back at Gabrielle. My voice came out harder than I intended. "Tell me what?" There was silence. Neither of them spoke. Gabrielle was crying now. The maid of honor looked uncomfortable but didn't volunteer information. The silence stretched. It felt like hours, but it was probably only seconds. Every moment that passed without explanation made my anxiety worse and made my imagination conjure increasingly terrible scenarios. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of hesitation and Gabrielle crying, she started confessing. She said she'd gotten extremely drunk in Vegas, that there had been a male stripper at the party, that she'd hooked up with him, that she was so sorry, that it hadn't meant anything, that she'd been planning to tell me but had panicked. The words came out haltingly, between sobs like she was being forced to pull each admission out against her will. But the confession was enough. My fiancée had cheated on me during her bachelorette party weeks ago, then came home and acted normal, continuing wedding planning. She had let me believe everything was fine while hiding this massive betrayal. I felt my stomach drop. I felt anger, shame, and humiliation wash over me simultaneously. Gabrielle was begging me to sit down, to talk privately, to let her explain fully. I refused to sit. Standing felt like maintaining some control in a situation where I had none. Sitting felt like accepting what she was telling me. My mind was racing through so many implications. The wedding was tomorrow. Guests were already in town. My parents had spent thousands of dollars. The venue was set up. Everything was ready. And my fiancée had cheated on me and hidden it. She had planned to marry me without ever telling me. We would have started our marriage with this massive lie if her brother hadn't intervened. I heard myself saying I wanted to see the video. Gabrielle had mentioned a video in her rambling confession. She said one had leaked somehow. Both women looked horrified. Gabrielle said no, that I didn't need to see it, that knowing about it was enough. But I insisted. If this had happened, if there was evidence, I needed to see it to understand the full extent of what she'd done. After more back and forth, her maid of honor finally pulled out her phone, sent me a video file. I opened it and watched footage that had clearly been taken at the bachelorette party. I watched Gabrielle with the stripper in ways that left no room for interpretation or minimization. The visual evidence was worse than the confession. It made it undeniably real in ways words hadn't fully accomplished. I felt betrayed on every level. By her actions. By her silence for weeks. By her maid of honor, who'd apparently known and said nothing. By everyone who'd been at that party and had kept this secret. I thought about the wedding tomorrow, about standing in front of 200 guests and making vows to someone who'd done this and hidden it, about building a marriage on this foundation of betrayal and lies. I thought about my parents who'd worked so hard to help pay for this wedding, about my extended family who traveled from across the country, about all the planning and money and emotional investment in an event that now felt like a sham. The devastation was overwhelming. I walked out of the room, without saying much more while Gabrielle was still crying and trying to talk. My thoughts were racing uncontrollably as I walked. She lied. How long was she planning to hide this? If she can do this before a wedding, what happens after we're married? I thought about calling off the wedding, about the logistics of canceling everything with less than 12 hours notice, about disappointing everyone, about the embarrassment and explanations. But I also thought about the alternative, marrying Gabrielle, knowing what I now knew, starting a marriage built on betrayal and deception, spending the rest of my life wondering what else she was capable of hiding. I stepped outside the hotel into the night air. I tried to clear my head enough to think. I said out loud to myself, to the empty parking lot, to the universe, I can't marry her. The realization settled over me with certainty. Whatever happened next, however complicated and embarrassing and challenging, I couldn't go through with this wedding. I went back to my room, but once I started replaying the events that happened after her trip, things began to make sense. Gabrielle's brother's distance for the past week and his uncomfortable demeanor at the rehearsal dinner show that he'd known for a while. Her maid of honor, who was avoiding eye contact but watching me, had known too. She has been assessing whether to say something or hope Gabrielle would confess before the wedding. All the pieces clicked into place. The vague answers about Vegas, Gabrielle's avoidance of the topic, the strange tension I'd noticed but dismissed. Gabrielle has been calling repeatedly since I left her room. Seeing that I wasn't picking up, text messages were flooding in, all begging me to forgive her, reminding me of the good times we'd had, saying she loved me and made a terrible mistake, but we could get past this. Each message made it worse. The fact that we'd had good times made the betrayal more painful, not less. She'd thrown away 4 years of genuine partnership for one drunken night with a stripper. I didn't respond to any of the messages. Her desperate attempts at damage control were annoying. At some point that night, Gabrielle came to my door to knock, but I ignored her the whole time she was there. Eventually, she left, thinking I wasn't in the room. I didn't sleep that night as my mind kept processing everything, making and remaking the decision to call off the wedding, alternating between certainty and doubt. By morning, I was resolved. I called my best man first, who'd been my friend since childhood, and told him what had happened and that the wedding was off. Although my friend was shocked, he was supportive, saying he'd help with whatever needed to happen next. I called my parents. That conversation was harder. They'd invested so much money and emotional energy into this wedding. They had been so excited to see me married. But when I explained what Gabrielle had done, they were horrified and supportive, said I was making the right decision. I began notifying vendors and dealing with cancellation logistics. Started making other calls. To the venue, to the photographer, to the caterer, canceling everything with less than 6 hours notice before the ceremony was supposed to start. Most vendors were understanding, given the circumstances. Said they'd work with us on refunds or rescheduling. A few were less sympathetic, but I didn't care about the financial implications. I just needed everything to stop. My phone was exploding with calls from everyone. Wedding guests who'd heard something was wrong, Gabrielle's family, mutual friends, and everyone who wanted explanations or wanted to intervene. I wasn't ready to answer most of them. I only sent brief text messages to key people, letting them know that the wedding is canceled and asking them to please respect my privacy right now. The pain was indescribable. Not just heartbreak, but humiliation, anger, betrayal, grief for the future I'd been planning, and embarrassment about the canceled wedding. All of it was hitting me simultaneously. Gabrielle wasn't giving up. When her direct attempts to reach me failed, she started enlisting others. Her parents called, begging me to reconsider. Friends from the wedding party called, saying everyone makes mistakes. Even some of my own relatives called, suggesting I shouldn't throw away 4 years over one incident. But my mind was made up. This wasn't just one incident. It was the incident plus weeks of deception, plus her plan to marry me without ever confessing, and her willingness to build our marriage on a foundation of lies. If Gabrielle's brother hadn't texted me, I would have married her and discovered the truth eventually. These things always come out, but it would have been after we were legally bound. After potentially having children. After years of investment in a relationship built on betrayal. Gabriel's brother had saved me from that. He had risked his relationship with his sister to ensure I knew the truth before making a permanent commitment. About a week after the canceled wedding, I got more details about what had actually happened in Vegas. Another friend of Gabrielle, who'd been at the bachelorette party, reached out to me. She explained the whole story. Said she felt I deserved to know everything, since Gabrielle's version had apparently been minimized. The group had gone to a club with male entertainers, standard bachelorette party activity. Gabrielle had been drinking heavily from the start of the evening. A stripper had performed for their group. Gabrielle had been enthusiastically engaged with the performance in ways that went beyond normal bachelorette party fun. Later, Gabrielle had initiated a hookup with the stripper in a more private area of the venue. This wasn't the stripper pursuing a drunk woman. This was Gabrielle actively choosing to hook up with him despite being engaged and days away from her wedding. Someone at the party, this woman didn't know who specifically, had recorded video on their phone. She then leaked the video online, either maliciously or carelessly. Gabrielle's brother had seen the video, apparently through social media or through someone sending it to him. He had been horrified to see his sister behaving this way right before her wedding. Gabrielle's brother had confronted Gabrielle along with her best friend, who was her maid of honor, about a week before the wedding. He had shown them the video and demanded that Gabrielle tell me immediately. Gabrielle had broken down, begged her brother not to tell me. She had promised she'd tell me herself, but needed time to figure out how. Her maid of honor had insisted that Gabrielle confess before the wedding, since the video is already out there. That starting a marriage with this secret was unconscionable. That she owed me honesty before I made a permanent commitment. But Gabrielle kept delaying. She would say she'd tell me tomorrow, then later, then after the wedding, once we were already married and I couldn't back out as easily. The truth was that Gabrielle never intended to tell me. She had planned to take the secret into our marriage and hope I never found out. Her brother had waited until the night before the wedding, hoping Gabrielle would do the right thing. When she clearly wasn't going to confess, he'd sent me that text. He had chosen my right to know over his sister's comfort. Hearing these details was both clarifying and devastating. Clarifying, because it confirmed my decision to call off the wedding was correct. Devastating, because it showed just how calculating Gabrielle's deception had been. This wasn't a drunk mistake followed by an immediate guilty confession. This was a choice followed by 3 weeks of deliberate cover-up and plans to trap me in marriage before I could discover the truth. I later learned, through mutual acquaintances, that Gabrielle's brother had moved out of state shortly after the canceled wedding. Gabrielle had blamed him entirely for destroying her relationship. She had apparently made his life miserable with constant accusations and family drama. Gabrielle's brother had chosen to relocate rather than deal with the fallout of doing the right thing. He had lost his relationship with his sister and some of his family to protect me from marrying someone who'd betrayed me. I tried to reach out to Gabrielle's brother several times to thank him, to tell him I understood what he'd sacrificed, to make clear that I didn't blame him. I was grateful. But he didn't respond to my messages. He had apparently decided to cut ties with everyone connected to that situation, including me. Looking back now months since the canceled wedding, I understand things more clearly. I learned that bachelor and bachelorette parties can reveal character in ways normal life doesn't. That Gabrielle's behavior in Vegas showed who she was when boundaries were relaxed and consequences felt distant. I learned that the cover-up is often worse than the crime. That Gabrielle's 3 weeks of calculated deception were more relationship-destroying than the initial cheating. The fact that her plan to marry me without confessing showed a complete lack of respect for my right to make informed choices. I learned that family members sometimes see the truth that others miss. Gabrielle's brother's willingness to destroy his relationship with his sister to protect me from a bad marriage was an act of genuine love and integrity. I learned that canceling a wedding is traumatic, but marrying the wrong person is worse. that the embarrassment and financial loss and emotional pain of calling everything off were temporary, that marrying Gabrielle would have been permanent damage. Most importantly, I learned that trust is foundational to marriage. That once trust is broken in such a calculated way, it can't be rebuilt. I knew after the breakup that I'd never have been able to trust Gabrielle again, knowing she'd been capable of such sustained deception. You might think I overreacted, that I should have forgiven one drunken mistake, that calling off the wedding was too extreme, given our 4-year history. But if you consider the weeks of lying and her plan to marry me without ever confessing, you would see that this is a fundamental character flaw. I loved Gabrielle, and I had genuinely believed she was the one I'd spend my life with. But the woman I loved wouldn't have done what she did, hidden it for weeks, and planned to trap me in marriage before I could discover the truth. The woman who did those things wasn't someone I could trust and build a life with. Walking away the night before our wedding was the hardest decision I've ever made. But it was also the right decision. I'm still recovering emotionally, still dealing with trust issues and cynicism about relationships, and still processing the trauma of such complete betrayal, right before what should have been the happiest day of my life. But I'm healing gradually. I'm focused on work, family, and rebuilding my life. The restaurants are doing well. I've taken on more responsibility as my parents gradually transition toward retirement. I have good friends and a supportive family. That's enough for now. Eventually, I'll be ready to risk vulnerability again, to try building something with someone trustworthy. But I'm grateful that I discovered the truth before legally binding myself to someone capable of such calculated betrayal. Thank you for listening.